So I have my Visual Studio Code open and I have my functions.html file and then a function.css file. And of course, today we are going to be doing something on CSS functions. And I did mention earlier that that will be the very last thing we will be doing in our CSS lesson series this for this particular set. And let's get to it. So what I'm gonna do is come in here and then I'm going to create a div and give it a class of parent, and in there I'll create another div and give it a class of child, right? Then I'll come back here. Let me minimize this. Let me increase the space here and minimize the Visual Studio. Yeah, then what I'm going to do over here is I'll just give this my parent, and then I'll say a background color of let me make it an aqua. Then I'll give it a width of 500 pixels and a height of 500 pixels as well. And so we have it showing here for us. And then I'll come back here and give my child, and then I'll give it a width of 100 pixels, and I'll give it a height of 100 pixels as well. Then I'll give it a background color of blue, and we have that showing here for us as well. Great. So now, CSS functions. What are CSS functions? Well, we have lots of functions in CSS, and then we use them. We've been using some of them since the very day we started with this training, but your attention haven't gone to it. Today, we are going to be looking at a few. We can't look at all the CSS functions. We're going to look at a few and how well we could apply them in making our websites. Then I'm going to include a link to external resources which you can get full information. You can get a whole list of CSS functions, and then you're going to be able to apply those things when building websites. All right. So first of all, we are going to look at the main function, and as you can see over here, I have my child div over here, which is 100 pixels in width and height. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove the width over here, and we'll look at our first function called what? The main function. And the main function, it takes up to what? It takes two parameters, or let me call it arguments, all right, and above. And what I can do is give it here let me give it 100 pixels. Then the second value, I'm going to give it 50%, all right? And we're not seeing anything happen. What happens with the main is it looks through the list of arguments given, and with the list of arguments given, it picks the minimum one. All right. We know that when you give a weight of 50% to an element, it's going to calculate 50% of each parent. So suppose I have this over here. Let me take this, and I have 50%. Let me comment this. I have a width of 50%. Now this takes half of its parent. But what happens with the main is that it looks through the two sets of values and then takes the least of them. So here, 50% would be, let's say that the width of the parent is 500 pixels. So 50% of 500 pixels would be 250 pixels, and this is 100 pixels. So this is the smallest. So that is what is happening over here. And should we use our CSS paper and we check that is 100 by 100 pixels? All right, great. Now, should we increase this value to 300? Let me make it 150 first, and it has changed to 150. Now let me select it, and it is 150, and it is still because 150 is still less than 50%. Remember, 50% is 250. So suppose we put in a value over here which is going to be bigger than 250, let's say 350. You realize that this stops right in the middle. Now let's use our CSS paper, and then let's check, and it is what? 250, even though we have given here a value of 350 pixels. So main looks through the list of arguments given and then settles on the least or the smallest value given. So that is one CSS function. To know a CSS function, what you do is you have the value, or you have the, I don't know what to call it, or the description or whatever, the name of the function, all right? And then we have the opening and closing braces. And if you've already done JavaScript or you've done some programming language already, you would know that this is how functions are declared in the various programming languages. The very next language you're going to be looking at is JavaScript, and we are going to be seeing more of these things over there. All right, so that's the main function. And then the other one we are going to be looking at is the max function. And as you may have wondered, it's right the opposite of main. What it does is it looks through and picks what the highest value. All right, so 50% here becomes what, 250 pixels. 350 pixels is the highest, and so it takes that. And should we use our CSS paper to check, we are now having what, 350 pixels. Now, should we change this down to, let's say, 100? You realize that it stays at 50% because that is the highest value. So that is the main function, and that is the max function. All right. Then there is one other function which is relatively new, but it's a combination of the main and max functions. And if you've done some CSS already, you probably may be thinking of what, the main max function. And if you're thinking of the min max function, then you're wrong, because that is not what we are looking at. The min max function pertains to gridbox, and we haven't done gridbox, so we wouldn't be looking at it. However, there is a feature called the clamp, right? There is a function, sorry, called the clamp, and let's see how that works. So what I'm coming to do is I'll come here, bring a paragraph element, and as usual, have my lorem some text over there. Then I'll come onto my paragraph, and then I'll give it a font size. First of all, I'm going to give it three different font sizes. Oh no, font size, right? And let me give it 1.25 rem. Sorry, 1.25 frame, and let's use our CSS paper to check, and that evaluates to 20 pixels. So in this instance, let's comment this, let's put this here and comment it out, and indicate that what, 1.25 frame will give us 20 pixels, and you understand what I'm doing in a moment, right? And then let's now change this to 3 rem, and 3 rem is too big. Let me make it 2 rem in this instance. All right, so 2 rem, and then a 2 rem evaluates to, let me make it 2.5, sorry, 2.5 evaluates to 40 pixels. So let me pick that again, 40 pixels, and then indicate. Then let me give it another relative unit, and let me say 3 viewport height, sorry, and that is very small. So 3 viewport height now becomes what, 18.72 pixels. Let me make this 3.5, and no, three viewport height should give us what we are looking for. All right, great. So let me bring this here again, and that gives us 18.72 pixels. So let's keep these values here. So what the clamp function does, sorry, yeah, clamp. What the clamp function does is what, it takes three values, and then we have what, the mean value, we have the preferred value, and then we have what, the max value. All right, so we're going to be looking at the mean, which is the smallest value possible, the preferred value, and then the max value. So for example, we can give it a mean value of 1.25 rem, and then we can give it a preferred value or an ideal value of 3 viewport heights. All right, then we can now give it a max value of 2.5 rem. All right, and before that, let me just comment this out. bring this particular unit here because there is something I was supposed to show you guys which almost skipped me. Let me take this out. Great. So we have our font size set to what? 3 of the viewport height. And then let's see something over here. Let me go to inspect elements. And then you realize that as I keep changing the viewport height, the size of the text keeps decreasing because the size of the text, what we have done over here is that what is going to be relative to the viewport height. So in this particular instance, this is changing. So even in my DevTools, when I come to compute it and I scroll down here, where is my, let me click on the paragraph and inspect it. So I have my font size. Realize that the font size is changing. So it goes from the max of 20.31 pixels to the smallest possible, which is 1.15 pixels, which you can't see. All right. So you should understand that the viewport height, when you said that, it means the font size is going to change based on the height of the user's viewport area. So if somebody is on, let's say, a mobile phone, they have a different viewport height. And even with different mobile phones, they have different viewport heights. Just like you could have different screen sizes for laptops or desktops, or even by changing the size of my browser over here, the viewport height changes. All right. So let me now take this out and then let's see what the clamp function does. So what it does actually is it first of all says what this is the smallest unit possible. Now my preferred unit is what 3 viewport height. All right, 3 viewport height, and then the maximum is what 2.5 rem. So the font size should be set to 3 viewport height. But when the viewport height is so small that when it is calculated, it's going to be less than 1.25 rand, then maintain it as what? At 1.25 rand. Also, if the viewport height is so big that when the size is calculated, the result is going to be bigger than 2.5 rem, then it means maintain it at what? 2.5 rem. So this is going to be changing, but once the resulting value is bigger than 2.5 rem, then it's going to be capped at 2.5. And if the resulting value is going to be smaller than 1.25 rem, then it's going to be 1.25 rem. So let's see what actually happens over here. On this particular viewport, our 3 viewport height is what? 2.37. All right, so as we keep, you could see now, let me change this to the viewport width so that I have a lot more space to explore. All right, because my screen is so small, I'm not able to do what I want to do. So now I've changed from viewport height to viewport width, and then let me make this a little bigger. Great. So you can see that in this instance, let me make this 2 rem so that we could see the result earlier. And you remember 2 rem is going to be 32 pixels. So let me change this and let's see what happens. All right. So at this point, you realize that as I change the viewport width, the size of the text what keeps changing. All right. But then let me change it, and if you could see from here that the size keeps changing. Now it's around 24, and as I keep reducing, it keeps reducing. All right. But once it gets to 20 pixels, even though I keep reducing the size of the viewport, the font size doesn't change. All right. And that is because of the clamp here. It says what? This should be the minimum value possible. So it's not going there. And then when I keep increasing, once it's bigger than 20 pixels, you realize that the font size keeps increasing. And then let me go further and see what happens. It's now at 31.98. And once it gets to 32, even though the viewport width keeps increasing, the font size doesn't increase because we've capped it at what 2 rem, which is 32 pixels. So that is what the clamp function does in CSS. Then remember that whilst I'm teaching, if there is anything that seems to be confusing, you can always prompt me. we'll proceed and look at the next CSS function, which is the calculate function. So we can, let me come back here, and on the parent, let me change the height to calc, and then with the calc function, we use it simply to do calculation. So I could give it a calc of what? 100 viewport height minus 50 pixels. All right. And then what is going to do, what happens here is that it's going to calculate the viewport height, that is from top to bottom, and then take 50 pixels from it. All right. So let me go back to inspect my elements here again. And you realize that as I keep reducing it, the viewport height is calculated and 50 pixels is taken from it. And so when it gets, the viewport height gets very small, still 50% of, sorry, 50 pixels is still going to be taken from what? The viewport height. So that is what that does for us. You can use it to do a lot of calculations however you want it. You can also have what? Addition. So I could say 50 viewport height 50 viewport height plus 50 pixels, and that is it. If I change this to only 50 viewport height, you'll see what will happen. This is the 50 viewport height, but when I add 50 pixels to it, now 50 pixels is added, and that increases it. Sorry, that increases the height a little bit. So that is what the calculation function does, and then we'll see how well we could get that to work in from tomorrow when we start building functions. Sorry, we start building projects. I've always been saying we'll start building projects, but tomorrow we're starting building. We'll start to build projects. Then we'll be looking at the next CSS function, which we did look at when we were doing variables. If you can't remember the lesson we had on variables, kindly check out the link. It's on YouTube. All right. So remember that when we were doing variables, we could declare a variable using what? Two dashes. Then we could say main, we now name the variable main color. Then we could say our main color is what? F00. And there is a reason why variables are important. And then also let me highlight this. When we're doing variables, I gave only one line of example. That is the use of colors. And you don't only use variables for colors, you can use variables for any property. All right. So I could just come back and say border radius, and then I could say 20 pixels, right? And so when I want to call this variable to work, I could just come here and say height. Then I could bring what? Var, that is the var function. And then I could now bring my what? Sorry, I was this is a height, so this is not supposed to be a color. Let me change this instead. And you already know that when you apply color to height, it's not going to work because it's not a matching property. So background color. Now the variable is working, all right. And so you can always change the color over here to your preference, as we did when we were doing variables. And I don't want to go into that. All right. So you use the var function to call variables. You declare a variable in CSS by using two dashes, and then to call a variable, you use the var function. Then I could come back and say border radius. Then I could go to var again and bring the border radius I've specified. So the border radius is now what? 20 pixels. Let me see if the CSS paper will get that for us as well. Right, so we have the border radius 20 pixels being applied over here. So if I should change this to 50 pixels, you realize that it has changed, and also we can see the effect on our div over here. Right, so that is basically the other CSS function. Then we'll be looking at another CSS function which we have been using as well, but we probably haven't noticed, which is the URL function. All right. And when we did backgrounds, you know that we could set a background image on an element. So we could come back and say background image. Then we bring what URL. So the URL is a function in CSS that helps us to get URLs or links to link to files or documents or whatever it is. Then I'll just bring my colon. Then I have a folder in my project directory called images. And then I have an image called big. All right. And my image, my background image is applied. You may not see it because if you could remember, the image is very large and so we can't see it. But then I could use a background size of contain so that we can, let me use cover, sorry. All right, so now our background image is showing over there. So that is the URL function. And then we also use, when we are importing external resources like other style sheets, when we were importing fonts and other things, let me go to Flexbox or CSS. We use the URL function over here to import the font from Google Fonts. And we just close that, close the file tree, and that is it. Then also, when we are declaring colors, we also use CSS functions, all right? Like the RGBA function, and then it takes in values. Let's me go with the RGB function. And what it does is it takes in values, red, blue, green values, and based on that, a color is applied. All right. So this goes from I think 0 to 255, I think. So when I have 000, we have black. When I have 0F0, we sorry, 02550, we have green. So that is red, green, and blue. So it means I'm having zero of red, zero of blue, and then 255 of green. Then I could give this 20 of red and give this 2050 of blue. And I'm not saying anything. Let me give this 10. And I'm having a difference in colors over here, right? Let me change this to 255 quickly and see what happens. I'm just experimenting with something I've never tried with. Great, it's gonna become white because when you mix all the colors, it's supposed to be white, like an FFF. So basically, that's the red, blue, green. And then we have the RGBA, which I did mention that the A is an alpha channel, and you can use it to control transparency. So when it's at zero point 0.5, it means we have zero point 0.5 transparency. If it is zero point 0.9, it means we have sorry, zero point 0.5 is zero point 0.5 opacity. All right, so when we have 1, it means it's very opaque, nothing can go through. When it is at 0, it means it is an 100% transparent. So 0.1, then you can see it a little slightly over there. So that is the RGB, the RGBA, and then you can also use the other like ones like the HSLA, the hue, saturation, and luminance functions. I think we took care of them when we were doing CSS colors. I think that was the very second lesson we had in CSS, so you could go back and see how to play around those figures to get the right colors for you. However, you don't even need to know these numbers. You shouldn't even know these numbers. All right. We have VS Code has this inbuilt color picker, so you could just move it around and choose whatever color is appropriate to you. And every color that exists in the world is here. Great. Then another function which we're going to be looking at today is the attribute function. All right. And for that, what I'm going to do is I'll come back here and then let me decrease this text over here to this. And then I'm going to give it a now what one thing we can always do in HTML is to add a custom attribute. All right. You know, we have some predefined attributes like the style, right? We have predefined attributes like the class, the ID, and then a few other attributes. All right. Now, we can always define our own attributes in HTML. And when you want to do that, you use what? The data prefix. So when I want to, maybe I could say data um, detail. All right. Which means I want to put in something over here. which is going to be detail about the paragraph, for example. So I could come here and say this is paragraph one. All right, and nothing is happening yet. Let me move this here. Let me move this a little bit. Let me duplicate this. A few line breaks. Right, great. So we have this here and this here. Down, this is going to be what? This is paragraph two. Let me remove the background image so we can see our text here very well. Then what I'm going to do is I'll go on to what my P, and then I would say P. When P is hovered, then I'll give it what? A before pseudo element. And it's some combinations we are doing over here. All right. So when P is hovered, we could just give P a pseudo element. Let me just do that directly. We could just give P a pseudo element. And whenever you give the before or after pseudo element, you should make sure that you define what a content. Else, whatever you're going to do wouldn't apply. There are instances where we wouldn't need the content, but we just have to declare it and give it a blank value. So I could give a content, and now I'm going to give a content as what? Let me see. Let me give it a before content. All right, before, and you realize that the before is showing before our what? Our paragraph text. All right. Then I could maybe I want what I want to do is give this make it a tooltip so that whenever this text is hovered, there's going to be an information about what the text does. All right. So let me come back here and give this a position of absolute. And now you realize that this is taken out. Then what I'm going to do is let me give this a top of 0. And you realize that both of them are now going to the top. Then a left of what? 0. All right. But I want this to be relative to this. So it should be right above this. All right. Are you getting it? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give a position of relative. We did this when we're doing CSS position. I think I haven't uploaded that video. I did promise that I was going to record another video because we had some background noises, and so I forgot to do that, and I'll do it. We have a position relative. We studied that when you give a position of absolute to a child element, it looks for another element that has a child of relative. Sorry, it looks for a parent or an ancestor that has a position of absolute, and then goes to work with it or goes to it. If it can't find none, then it goes to what? The viewport area. Are you getting it? So now we want this to be relative to this. So I'm going to give a position of relative to the paragraph, and you realize that this is now here. All right. So the top, I want it to go to top a little bit, so I can give it minus 10 pixels. For it to shift to the top, let me make it minus 15, and that is let me make it minus 20. Yeah, this is better. All right. So I could go ahead and give this a padding of 5 pixels. Then give this a background color of black. Let me give it a background color of blue, and make this. All right. So let me make this 50 pixels. 40 should be okay. All right. Now we have our tooltip designed over there. Let me make this black, and then give a color of yellow. Great, so we can see it over here. I just want to use a few properties so that we could see how we can be using them. Then a border radius of 15 pixels. That would be too much. 10, and this distance, that is great. Let me make this 10. Great. Then great. So what I want over here should be what? The tooltip. the tooltip which we have defined over here. All right. So, but I want this to show only when P is hovered. All right. So I'll just come here and then give it a hover state. So when it is in the hover state, before the before pseudo class will be applied to it. If it's not in a hover state, the before pseudo class will not be applied to it. That is what we are doing over here. All right. So we can see now when I hover this element, you realize that what the what do you call it? The tooltip is now showing, and when I hover over this, it's now showing. But then I want the tooltip to be dynamic. I want it to reflect what we have defined in HTML over here. So I'm now going to use what the attribute property. Then I'll say data. Well, what do we do? Data detail, right? Let me see what I did over there. Data detail. No, great. So it's not supposed to be in quotes. So when I hover over this, you realize that I am having what? This is paragraph 2. When I hover over this, this is paragraph 1. So you could use the data attribute combined with the hover pseudo class and then the before pseudo element and use great tooltips so that anytime somebody hovers on a different object, they have a different tooltip. So you realize that we are now using dynamic tooltips and we are not even doing anything with JavaScript, all right? Purely HTML and CSS. And there are a whole lot of ways we could do a whole lot of things. That is, if we decide to combine the fragments we are learning now. So that is the attributes function. That is what it does. Remember, if you're using the data attributes, if you're using a custom attribute in CS in HTML, you should prefix it with what data, and it's going to work well for you, especially when you're doing JavaScript. I've never tried it without the data attributes. Let me just try that and see if it will work. Let me take this off, save, come back here, take this off, and it works. But if you're dealing with it in JavaScript, you're gonna have challenges if you don't prefix it with the data. So the rule of the thumb is always bring the data dash then your custom property. That is it on the attributes, and then basically that's all we will be covering today on CSS functions. There are a few more I want us to look at. Before that, let me get back here and then bring in an image. Then I go to my images folder, bring in my big image, and that is it, very wide. Let me reduce this, let me increase this and reduce my VS Code a little bit. Then let me give it a width of 500, sorry, a width of 500 pixels. Let me bring in a few breaks so I can scroll up. Great. So I could just come to my images and then apply some styling to my image when it is hovered. All right. So another CSS function or other CSS functions we could look at is the brightness function, the hue rotate function, the contrast and saturate. There are other ones. We have the grayscale as well, and we'll be looking at them. All right. And these ones work with the filter property. So on my image, I'm saying that when my image is hovered, then I'm going to give a filter property of let me not use the blur. I've never tried it. Let me use the brightness. All right. Then I want to change my brightness to 50% when my image is hovered. So when I hover over my image, you realize that the brightness what changes. 100% nothing happens because that is its normal state. And when you increase it over 100%, you realize your image begins to kind of fade out or become too pale. So that is what the brightness does. Great. Then, well, another one we can look at is the hue rotate. And what the hue rotate does is when you look at the color wheel, it rotates to the complementary color, all right? So let me now look at the color wheel. Then, first of all, let me give my image. Let me not do this to my an image. Let me come back to our parent element, and then we have a background color of main, and our main. Let me change the main here to red. All right. Let me change the main to red. Then on my parent, when the parent is hovered, then I could say filter and then hue saturate, sorry, hue rotate, then give it what? 90 degrees, 180, let me do it 180 degrees, all right? And what happens is that it takes the opposite color on the color wheel. I don't know if that is what we're given 180 degrees. So it changes to the color that is opposite it on the color wheel, right? So suppose we change this red to yellow. Let's have a blue, right? And when we hover over it, we find another one, and it's slightly deeper than. It's not like it's deeper than what we have over there. So the blue, instead of taking yellow, takes this, and let me change this to 90. So opposite the red, when the hue, a blue of hue is rotated, now we have red. Let's see, we have blue here. Let me make this big. We have blue here, and when you look at 90 degrees, should you draw a line from here? So this to go here, this is about 90 degrees. So blue gives you red, and if you have green, let me see, green should give you yellow or blue. Let's see what happens over there. All right, so it gives you a relative version of the blue. All right, so that is what the hue saturate does. Then also we could change the contrast. All right, contrast, and now let me put that on my image. Oh, sorry, not 90 degrees, 40%, and that is how the contrast works. All right, 100% we won't see anything. Make it 200, and boom, the contrast is too much. So you can manipulate it, around it however you want your web page to appear, depending on the style you are hoping to achieve with your web page. The same way you could also have the saturate. When it is hovered, and saturate simply increases the color. So should we make this 500%? Realize that it deepens the color of our image when it is hovered. You could choose to apply this when the image is not hovered and it's going to work with it. All right. So however you want to go with it. And then also another thing you can do, that's the grayscale, to make your image black and white. So it's over there. Then you can also combine uh, these properties. Let me make this at 10% grayscale. Then combine them. Then have your brightness at 10%, which is going to be very dark. You can also have, let me not bring the hue saturate over here, because let me see so I say hue saturate, hue rotate 90 dg, and we can also see that happening. Let me increase the brightness to 80% to see the effect of our hue rotate over there. All right, so let me make this to 70 degrees, and we can change the color of our background image however we want it to appear on a web page. So those are the functions we are going to be looking at for today, and that is all the lesson we have for today on CSS functions. If anybody has a question, kindly let me know. All right, speak up.
Good evening, sir.
Yeah, good evening.
Sir, I want to ask the minimum and the max with the clamp function. Does it really account for responsiveness of a website?
It does, and that is what it really helps in. It helps to create a responsive website without having to use media queries like we did the other day. All right.
Okay,
For
okay,
a
sir.
beginner, it might be confusing, but it shouldn't be. And we'll see how well we can put that. So you could define a screen size of, let's say, a minimum. A minimum. Let me go. Let's go back and where did we do our clamp? All right. So we have this over here, and then remember. Okay. So inspect. Then let me change the device size to mobile phone. Increase this to 100%. And then let me move this here. Computer tab. So we are having our font size at what? At 20 pixels. So are you getting it? So you when you have your font size 20 pixels, it's relatively okay on a mobile phone. It's even big on a mobile phone, all right? But then you want to make sure that when a person is on a desktop, the font size should increase a little bit for them. But then somebody could also be on a 4K monitor, are you getting it? Which is going to increase the font size too much. So the clamp function says that okay, it should be relative to the viewport width. But then if the person's screen is too small, like the person is on a mobile phone, then let's stop at what? At 20 pixels. Are you getting it? If the screen
Yes,
is
sir.
too big, then let's stop at 32 pixels or whatever you think will work well for the kind of design that you're trying to pull off. Are you getting it?
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
All right. Have I really answered your question well, or there is some question again? If anybody has a question, kindly let me know so that we could bring to this lesson too. And all right, then if there are no questions, I would say thank you all for